Have you ever experienced a piece of art that felt personal in a way you couldn't quite explain? Not because it was flawless or groundbreaking or even something you would call your favorite, but because it arrived at the right moment. Sometimes art connects with us not through analysis or quality, but through timing. It shows up when we're ready for it, and suddenly it feels like it's reflecting something back at us, whether that was the intention of the artist or simply timing or personal interpretation. There's probably a piece of art like that in your life, one that captured you for reasons outside of the work itself. Perhaps you'll even realize what that is over the course of this video if you haven't already. I didn't get into Persona particularly early really. I started with Persona 5 Royal, the newest of the mainline games, then played Persona 4 Golden, and finally Persona 3 Reload. But I didn't play them back to back. Each of these games entered my life at very different moments, when I was dealing with very different things. And because of that, each one resonated with me in a completely different way, though still connected by my own life's journey. This isn't about projecting myself onto the characters. It's not about seeing Joker and thinking, he's literally me, bro. It's about recognizing emotions, themes, and ideas that already existed in my life and seeing them reflected through art at exactly the right time. These games managed to align with where I was in my life when I played them, and I'd like to explore that. To get down in some form my thoughts and feelings and reflections, and hopefully help some of you to consider your own relationships with art, because it's probably deeper than you think. This video contains discussions of mental health and some very heavy themes, and it will include major spoilers for Persona 5 Royal, Persona 4 Golden, and Persona 3 Reload and its DLC, The Answer. And whilst this video is about personal resonance with art, and we will be exploring how art and mental health interact, art is not a substitute for professional help or medication or even just talking to someone. It can help, yes, but please remember to look after yourselves. Persona 5 Royal was my first Persona game, and in hindsight, it's not hard to see the mirror it was holding up to me. It was 2022, COVID was just beginning to die down, I'd been more or less single for 2 years, and I lived alone in a tiny, cold, almost one-room apartment. I have, I think, a sort of skill to completely ignore my own feelings and just think I'm fine, no matter what, but 2022 to the end of 2023 was the most isolating and lonely time in my life. More so than the pandemic that preceded it, as during it I was living with family, and then around mid-2022 I moved and began living alone. I had friends I could talk to online, but even then I'd still find myself isolating as a sort of self-destructive coping mechanism. But of course, I was fine. I just did my work, which was from home, and then I'd play games and eat food and go to sleep. And that was life. I barely went outside, and I barely interacted with another person at all. So, one day, I decided to play this JRPG I've heard so much about, and the game opens with Joker, our protagonist, moving away from his parents to stay in the attic of a cafe alone. He then goes to school, but the students there all have heard of his criminal record and judge him and stay away from him, and so, here too, he's alone. In fact, a central location in the game, the Velvet Room, a room that shifts its appearance depending on who's in it, takes the form of a prison. And one of the feelings I remember more than most from that time was feeling trapped. As the game progresses, you meet others who are isolated in their own ways, those being, to begin with, Ryuji and An. They are outcasts due to rumors, abuse, and the weight of others' power, but they are very different individuals. What connects them, however, is loneliness, and of course, further from that, a desire to see justice done. But they share this feeling of not fitting in anywhere else. In many ways then, Persona 5 was showing me a kind of connection that I didn't know I craved, so naturally I latched onto it. A huge part of Persona 5 is the confidant system, spending time with characters, learning about them, and strengthening bonds through conversation. Mechanically, it's about choosing the right dialogue options and unlocking perks and abilities. But for where I was, it was about connection. Persona games are long, and over time you naturally grow attached to these characters. But this wasn't just narrative immersion, it was filling a gap in my life that, at this point, I wasn't ready to acknowledge. And this is a central theme for my connection to this game. I was hearing a message, there was a mirror being held up to me that showed me what was wrong, what I was missing. But I wasn't listening to it, I wasn't seeing it. I was wearing a mask to hide myself from me. I was, unbeknownst to me, avoiding doing the things that would have helped me the most. The entire game is about cognition, about seeing the world through different lenses and how those lenses can become distorted. The obvious example of that would be Futaba's palace. Futaba is another character dealing with isolation, though this time far more extreme. She almost never leaves the single room she stays in, and this is due to the death of her mother, and whilst I wasn't dealing anything close to that, the way she internally warps reality to blame herself was very reminiscent of how I was warping reality to believe that I was okay. And of course, things didn't get better from here. The isolation only got worse as I continued to ignore my mental health, and without going into too much detail, I was dealing with a neighbor at the time who was a genuine threat, both physically and mentally, both to me and to the other people who lived in the apartments in the building. Something that would have quite a traumatic effect on me. The result of all this was that more than ever I was using games and isolation as a coping mechanism. Because if I was distracted by another world, then the depression, anxiety, trauma, and loneliness simply weren't there anymore. And this is where the mirror should have been most obvious. Persona 5 Royal is, of course, not the first iteration of Persona 5. This version of the game adds a new antagonist, one often hailed as one of the series' best, Dr. Mariki. Dr. Mariki is a therapist. He truly wants nothing more than to help people, and one day he gains the power to do just that. His fiancée suffers through the murder of her parents, which puts her into a state of severe depression and post-traumatic stress. This is where Mariki awakens to his power to alter the cognition of others. He makes her believe that her parents died when she was young, but also caused her to forget about him. This grief sets him on a path to use his power to help as many people as he can. Mariki eventually manages to take control over reality and alter everyone's cognition to make everyone happy. But Dr. Mariki is escapism personified. At one point, he'd even altered the cognition of Sumire Yoshizawa to believe that she is her own sister who was killed in a road accident because she couldn't bear the guilt she felt for not living up to the sister she believed to be better than her. Mariki believes that entirely removing all sources of pain is the best thing for everyone. He changes things about people in whatever way he believes will benefit them the most. He's a pretty awful therapist in that way. It's the same principle as just telling someone to ignore their problems, which, of course, is exactly what I was doing. Mariki constructed a world in which everyone could hide from their pain, and, well, I was caught in it too. The game does paint Mariki as the antagonist during this section, but I never made the connection between what the game was telling me and what I was doing. at least not in any meaningful way. The game makes it clear that the path forward isn't ignoring your pain or hiding from it, but facing it and learning from it, and eventually moving past it with new perspectives and being all the better for it. The final fight between Joker and Mariki is a slow, painful fistfight whilst Mariki screams his pain and feelings out. It's not subtle about its messaging. You have to face reality eventually, because if you don't, it only ends badly. I will never forget my first experience with Persona 5. This game resonated with me so strongly, and of course that isn't only because of what I've said so far, it's also the art direction and the voice acting and the gameplay and the exquisite soundtrack. Those things would have all kept me playing, but everything else I've spoken about so far is what has me remembering. It's what makes me look back so fondly on this game, because despite where I was in life, I had somewhere I could go that felt like home. Somewhere that understood me when I didn't understand myself. This video, to an extent, and I'll talk about that later, but this video exists partly because I remembered a meme of all things that I saw a while ago that said the best time to play a Persona game is when you're horribly depressed. And I suppose in a weird, morbid kind of way, that's at least part of the thesis for this video, because I did, and it was something I'll never forget. So that was where I was when it comes to Persona 5, but to understand my experience with Persona 4, I need to go over the events that led up to me playing it. I would like to reiterate the disclaimer here, as this section of the video is where things will be getting the darkest and the heaviest and the most explicit. I'll do my best not to mention anything explicitly once we get into the Persona 4 section properly, so if you're sensitive to these topics or you just don't want to hear things of this nature, there will be a timestamp on screen to go to skip this section. Everything I was dealing with eventually culminated towards the end of 2023, in which I attempted on multiple occasions to take my own life. I had planned each attempt in advance and had convinced myself that it was simply time for it to happen. I'd tried life, it hadn't worked out, oh well. That was where my mind had managed to convince itself to go, and I was okay with that. I simply didn't see any alternative, despite alternatives most certainly existing. After the final attempt, I panicked and finally decided to go against the comfort of isolation and actually contact my family and explain what I'd done, and I ended up moving back in with them. It was a strange state of being to be in, especially around Christmas, a Christmas that I genuinely believed I wouldn't experience. And of course I felt guilty. I doubt many people wouldn't in that position, and so I figured I should talk to a doctor, and from there I started therapy and medication and generally began a journey to heal. And this was where my experience with Persona 4 Golden began, just a little before going to see the doctor. Persona 4 Golden is a weird one, because I don't think many fans of the game would disagree with me that it's the most upbeat and I guess happy of the modern games, but it is also simultaneously about a murder mystery. But again, maybe that's just my own journey speaking here. At this point in my life, I was living with family again and starting to heal from what had come before, and so things were starting to look much more hopeful for me. And so arriving in the sleepy town of Inaba felt less like exile and more like a fresh start. The game also doesn't immediately treat you like an outcast like Joker in Persona 5. It's much more welcoming. Your guardian is nicer to you, your classmates treat you better, and despite the recent murders being talked about, it's a much less oppressive atmosphere. However, the murder mystery aspect does of course catch up with you and your new friends as you end up searching for a missing person. Now, a central premise of Persona 5 is that people wear masks to hide their true selves from the world to fit in, to hide from pain, and indeed from themselves. But if Persona 5 was hinting that you should face yourself, then Persona 4 punches you in the face with the idea. Every party member you meet ends up having to, quite literally, face themselves. Face all of the parts of themselves that they never wanted to acknowledge, and they have to accept this side of themselves by battling with this side of themselves. And this time, this struck a chord with me for reasons I absolutely understood. A large part of the therapy I was going through at the time was just being asked questions about myself that I had purposefully not been acknowledging. And those questions could be pretty hard to answer, but being able to understand and accept parts of yourself is the first step to being able to heal. And for me, that was what the majority of Persona 4 represented. Because your party members aren't suddenly exactly the people they want to be after this point. You have to work through things with them. Kanji, for example, still needs your help to learn to express himself without feeling embarrassed and like he's not a real man. But it starts with acknowledging yourself, and that isn't always easy to do. I was on a journey of healing, and much like it does for the protagonists, the Velvet Room in-game felt like it was reflecting that too. In Persona 5 it was a prison, but in Persona 4 it was a car, driving to an unknown destination. Persona 4 often faces criticism for having poor pacing towards the end of the investigation, as it switches from heavy plot beats to a bunch of slice-of-life segments featuring talent shows and band performances. But it's these moments that encapsulate what Persona 4 means to me the most. The moments that I remember the most fondly. There's an ever-present feeling in this game of there always being a light at the end of the tunnel, and these moments taking place after the big, plot-heavy sections of the game really solidify that. Persona 4 has you solve a series of murders. You find the killer and save the day, but the game doesn't end there. Life goes on. You and your friends go on a skiing trip where Naoto proves that she's the best character in the game.
I'm sorry, Teddy. Only people have human rights.
Towards the end of the skiing trip, you end up in another dungeon, this time having to save Marie, a character you and your friends have interacted with over the course of the game so far. Marie has convinced herself that she needs to die in order to save everybody else, and admittedly when you look at the scene, it can seem a little weird because you're trying to save her life when she's told you it'll literally end the world, but I wasn't looking at the scene in that way when I first played it. Marie at this stage is convinced that her time is up, that her role in the world was fulfilled and she had to go. And if you listened to the section earlier, that might sound pretty familiar. Obviously the situations were completely different because I'm not some kind of supernatural godlike being, but that feeling of your time being up reminded me exactly how I had felt. And what made it interesting was that now I got to see it from an outside perspective. In controlling the protagonist, it was almost as if when I was shouting at Marie, I was shouting at my past self. Because you come up with another solution. A solution that was always there, but that Marie, that I, couldn't see. It was like this strange out-of-body deja vu kind of experience, and I've genuinely never felt anything like it. And if something can evoke a feeling like that, then how can it be called anything less than art? After this section comes the end of the game, and for the true ending, the golden ending as it's known, there is one more dungeon to do. And it's upon completion of this dungeon that the car the Velvet Room has become finally reaches its destination. A beautiful, calm, serene landscape. A world finally at peace. Persona 4 is this journey. There are ups and downs, victories and defeat, pain and loss, but also joy and love and friendship and growth. The dungeon's final boss seems insurmountable, but you're able to pull through in a way that would have been impossible at the start of the journey. For me, if it weren't obvious by now, the journey represents my own mental health recovery journey. From the fresh start to the car arriving in a much more peaceful place, but the game isn't quite over just yet. And this ending also gets criticism for its pacing, but after you leave the town at the end to return home, there's a time jump, and you return to Inaba in the summer. You meet up with your friends once again, and you just hang out and enjoy yourselves. This was something absent from Persona 5's ending, and here, for me, this was what I needed this game to end on. This ending left me feeling completely satisfied. It felt like a genuine happy ending. Persona 5 Royal's ending, while still happy, was also vague, like the future could hold anything, and at the time, the future for me was virtually non-existent. Persona 4 Golden's ending felt like it was telling me everything would be okay. It was filled with hope and possibility. And Persona 4 was emblematic of hope, at a time where I was discovering what hope was again, after completely abandoning the concept. The series as a whole contains themes of finding yourself. That's generally why it centers around characters in their later teen years, and I think to a degree I could have played either of these games interchangeably and had the experiences stay somewhat the same. And that can, in large, be put down to the modern Persona formula. They are role-playing games, after all. But the specifics of each game's added content, Mariki for Persona 5 and the Marie section for Persona 4, resonated with me in such a unique way that could never be replicated. And here we get to the in-between. After Persona 4, therapy was over, medicine had run its course, and I was in a much better place. Things weren't perfect, of course, even now there are good days and bad days, but it's a long way from where I was at the end of 2023. Now at the beginning of the video I said that I didn't play these games back to back, and that's true, but Persona 3 Reload was already out when I'd finished Persona 4, so it wasn't long before I got playing it. But there was enough of a time gap for me to have internalized my healing journey a little more, and so Persona 3 became a game of reflection. Persona 3, to me, is, despite being my least favourite of the three here, the game that represents Persona the best. Persona is a series in which the core mechanic is that you have 1 year to live your life where you find it. You make the decisions on how you spend your time in this world, what you do, who you interact with, and how you interact with them. But the time is finite. There is always an ending. This is apparent in every Persona game, but 3 achieves this in the most stark way possible by being so closely associated with death. Persona 3 shows better than any other that we ourselves have limited time, that we ourselves need to choose how to best spend it. And that led me to see this game very introspectively, but also in a somewhat contradicting way, in a much more light-hearted way. I saw myself in characters like Miss Toriumi using games as an escape from the tough parts of her life. I saw the way characters like Junpei grew and learned from their own flaws and used that knowledge to better themselves, and I saw myself there too. But I also felt distance from the game. I didn't connect with it like I did with the other two, and it made me wonder why. It certainly wasn't that the music was worse or the visuals. For a long time I thought it must just be the characters, but I realized that what was different was me. I could objectively see myself in areas of the game, but never my current self, always the past. That's not to say I wasn't enjoying myself. I even enjoyed the Tartarus sections that so many seem to despise, but there was no emotional core for me to latch onto. In a game with so much emotion throughout, that seemed rather odd. I was at a stage where I was back to believing that life was truly worth living, and that's where the game managed to grip me in a way that I'm not sure is a unique experience, but I've also never heard anyone else describe. Persona 3 being an older game, I was well aware that the protagonist was meant to die at the end of it. and the closer I got to the end, the less I wanted that to happen. The game hadn't gripped me like the other two had at all. It slowly wormed its way in because of knowledge that I shouldn't have even had before playing it. The closer I got towards the end, the more I built up the relationships between the protagonist and the other characters, the more invested I became, because I knew this was no longer a game where the good guys obviously win in the end. I knew he was going to die. I didn't know how, I didn't know why, but I knew it was going to happen. The closer I got to the final confrontation, the more I wondered. Have they changed the ending in the remake? Did I just get wrong information? Did they add a way to save him? All these questions piled up, all these tiny pieces of hope, until eventually the final battle against the ancient death god Nyx came along, and we survive? Nyx was defeated, the apocalypse averted, and time passes and we continue our school days. I felt like I'd truly escaped the clutches of death in this moment. And then, the final cutscene. On the roof of the school with your friends running to you, you have two options, and both of them lead to the same thing. Close your eyes and pass on, and the game ends. It was inevitable. Death is inevitable. It was always inevitable. And I actually laughed. For the first time in years, I was at a point in my life where I truly wanted to live, and this game had just shown that being torn away. It was almost poetic. If I played Persona 3 when I played 5, this would have felt awful, but I'd have moved on from it quickly. If I played it when I played 4, I probably would have felt cheated, but that moment wasn't what defined Persona 3 for me. It was just the beginning. Once again, we come to additional content, and this time it comes in the form of Persona 3's The Answer DLC. Unlike the main game, I knew nothing going into this. Now, to add a disclaimer of sorts, this is the type of story that I imagine hits hard for someone who has experienced bereavement, but beyond pets, I am lucky enough to not have had to go through that myself, and definitely lucky that I didn't experience it a few years ago. But if you're familiar with the game and wondering why I don't mention such an obvious theme, that's why. The Answer takes place in the aftermath of Persona 3, and you experience the group dealing with the loss of the main character. As the DLC progresses, the group finds out that there is in fact a way to save the main character, and the group becomes more and more divided due to the potential ramifications. Now, at this point, despite being pretty sure that it would give a bad ending, I knew what my decision was going to be. I was going to save him. I was going to do or to sacrifice whatever was needed. I kept running through all of the reasons he had to live, the relationships he'd made, the experiences he could still have, and it made the decision perfectly clear. I was going to save my boy. And this is where we get to why this video even exists in the first place, because it was never meant to be anything like this. After I finished playing The Answer the first time, I saw a lot of negativity online for it, but personally, I'd had a great time with it, and so originally, this video was just going to be about The Answer and why I think it's great. And it all came down to that desire I had to save the protagonist and the conclusion of the story. After playing through the DLC, waiting for my chance to make the choice I always knew I was going to make, the game made a decision of its own. You never get to make a choice. You never get the option to sacrifice something or someone to bring him back, or to work out some kind of trick or rewind time or any other solution. There is no choice. The DLC concludes with the characters better processing their grief and being able to move on, and that's it. I got completely sucked into exactly what the game was trying to say. You can't bargain with death, you can't cheat it, you can't rewind it. It is a complete inevitability, and it is absolute. The same as it had always been, the same as it was in the base game. And once I'd realized what the game had done, I was left stunned. And then, after the credits rolled, after I'd wanted to make that video and enjoying the answer, I realized something further. This DLC wouldn't have even nearly had the same effect that it did if I were not exactly where I was in life when I played it. If I hadn't come through the journey that I did, if I hadn't been able to reflect in the way that I did, if I hadn't wanted to live, then I wouldn't have wanted him to live. And even if I had, the ending wouldn't have taken on the meaning that it did for me. That's what led to this video existing in the state that it does. The game didn't just make me reflect on itself, but the entire journey I took to get to it. And when I looked through that journey, the other games were right alongside me. None of these games directly impacted my life. This video is not going to be titled something like Persona Saved Me. It didn't, but I connected so deeply with all of these games because of the journey I went through and how that journey was reflected back at me. I saw myself in these games even without realizing it sometimes, and no matter what you're experiencing or consuming, that's what makes art so beautiful. This melding of intent and interpretation and lived experience coming together to create something that resonates with you in a way you never expected. It's truly extraordinary what the minds and creative visions of people can impart upon others. Art is something that I never really appreciated until recently, at least not in the way I do now. It's something that has developed and grown as I've looked at the things I enjoy and tried to understand why I enjoy them. But I've never been one for critical analysis. It's something I'd like to get better at, but it's certainly not the point of this video. This video is not about my journey of healing. This video is about my journey of discovering a deeper love for the media that I consume. I've loved world building and the craft that goes into that for a long time, but this idea of resonance was something I'd never explored before. And it's through the dual experience of playing these games and my life that it finally clicked. Something beyond the surface level, beyond just feeling the love for a game, but a feeling that stays with you and lets you peel away the layers and get lost in a world until you're just left staring back at yourself. That's what this has all been about. But I think, after all this time, I should let Atlas, the developers, speak for themselves. Thank you all for watching.
Or to put it another way, this is a fantasy. But can it truly be dismissed as something so far removed from you? If indeed you wish to cross to our world for a time, I would first ask that you indulge one question. Is fantasy limited to the confines of imagination? Would you call it a powerless creation? More than wishful thinking, more than fiction. Something capable of affecting the realities beyond its bounds. This must be what you believe.
Well, that's the end of the video. I do hope you all enjoyed. This is just sort of a post-video ramble, I suppose. Just wanted to firstly thank all of you for watching, and also a big thank you to Lasers for looking over my first draft and helping to get this video to where it is now. This is by far the most time I've spent on a single video. Pretty sure I started working on it sometime around the end of January, and it's almost April at the time of recording this. Granted, I could have shaved a month off, but did it to be as good as it could be, so I was waiting to get all of my audio setup updated, so hopefully if you've seen any of my other videos, you noticed a difference there. But anyway, I do have some small plans about what's next. I actually want to do an updated version of my Elden Ring video that I made years ago. Pretty sure I still have the script, so I want to update that and bring it more in line with something like this. I don't want to make too many changes because I still want to reflect how I felt at the time, but I want to bring the quality up as much as I can. But yeah, that's my next project, so if you enjoyed this video, then be sure to subscribe for that, and like the video and all that good stuff. Also, if you have any feedback or suggestions for future videos, then please do let me know down below. And for any of you who are still watching, who are here for my Elder Scrolls content, it'll still be here. I haven't stopped liking it or anything. The Elden Ring video even has a lot of Elder Scrolls discussion in it, so it's not going anywhere just yet. But I've been rambling for far too long, so thank you all again for watching, and I will see you in the next one.